entertain.
Tonight on Talking Politics, I'll sit down with Boston City Council President Ed Flynn on his push to bring back in-person meetings, the council's bullying problem, and why a majority of his colleagues want to significantly cut the Boston police budget. But first, a year ago this month, the Supreme Court threw precedent to the wind, tossing out the decades-old ruling in Roe v. Wade, infuriating abortion rights supporters across the country.
I'm angry. I'm fired up. The fight is not over.
As expected, that decision immediately triggered a wave of legislation aimed at severely restricting abortions or even eliminating them altogether. But here in Massachusetts, many protections were already codified into state law, with abortion legal up to 24 weeks of pregnancy and later, if necessary, to protect the mother's life and health, or because of a lethal, fatal abnormality. Still, after Roe's reversal, advocates here urged lawmakers to do a lot more to keep Massachusetts leading on reproductive rights. So now that 1 year has passed, has Beacon Hill heeded that call? And what might the future hold when it comes to abortion rights in Massachusetts and across the country? I'm joined now by Renee Landers, a professor of law at Suffolk University and the vice chair of the board of the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, and Rebecca Hart-Holder, the executive director of Reproductive Equity Now. Thank you both for being here for this conversation.
Thank you.
Renee, any assessment of where things stand in Massachusetts, I know needs to be situated in a discussion about the broader national context. How would you characterize the national impact of the reversal of Roe roughly 1 year on?
Well, I would say that it has really solidified our commitment to trying to make sure that the laws in Massachusetts are protective of reproductive rights. But even with, really strong laws here that not only protect, as you said in your introduction, the access to abortion, there are also strong protections in law to try to protect providers in Massachusetts who provide care that's legal in Massachusetts from being prosecuted or from having their licenses affected because of legal actions in other states if they provide care to residents of other states. So I think that's a very important development in the law. Remains how effective those measures will be in the national context. And then finally, though, I think it's important to recognize that we still have some gaps here in Massachusetts where it's very difficult for people in some parts of the state to get reproductive health care and abortion care in particular, the islands, southeastern Massachusetts. So I think that we still have some work to do here.
Let's get to that work in a second, but I want to ask you a little more about what's happened nationally. My understanding is we've got about half the country right now, or half the states in the country that have near total bans on abortion on the books. But you and I were emailing earlier in the week. There's also indirect effects, right? Like, for example, providers choosing to not go to places that have restrictive policies and thereby effectively creating a complete ban. Am I right about that?
Well, yes. So there are two factors at play. One is that some of the states, some of these restrictive state laws, not all of them, have exceptions for to protect the health of the pregnant person or the life of the pregnant person or for fetal abnormalities. However, some of the laws are so vaguely written that it makes the physicians really reluctant to take action in cases where a woman is miscarrying, for example, and so they wait until the health consequences are very risky for the person before taking action that would be medically appropriate to end the pregnancy. So that's one. And then on the shortage of physicians, there's already a nationwide shortage of physicians. Generally, it's particularly acute for OBGYN in that specialty. And the recent statistics from the applications for residency programs and OBGYN around the country indicate that physicians in that field are avoiding the states with restrictive laws, and that other physicians are avoiding those states. And so those states also have some of the most severe shortages of physicians, and so this is going to exacerbate problems in delivering any kind of basic health care in some of these states.
Okay, thanks for that overview. Rebecca, I want to get you to talk more about the state situation that Renee touched on a moment ago. Your organization and Renee's and the ACLU of Massachusetts released right after Roe's reversal this Beyond Roe agenda. What is the status of that agenda, which contained a bunch of provisions you said the state should do to strengthen abortion rights here in the state? What's the status of it 1 year on?
We've made huge progress here in Massachusetts. So obviously we anticipated that Roe was going to fall when we passed the Roe Act in December of 2020. But then when the Dobbs opinion leaked, we went farther and we worked day and night with the Attorney General's office and with our allies on Beacon Hill to frankly write best in the nation protections for abortion providers and providers of gender affirming care. We also have made investments in strengthening our law to make sure that people don't have to travel out of state for care if they need that care post 24 weeks, and to make sure that we have access to medication abortion on college campuses. Another really important piece of what the legislature did in the fall is that it invested $20 million in abortion access and infrastructure. Frankly, that's something that I would have told you was impossible a year before the Dobbs decision, but it is a really clear statement of the importance that Massachusetts places on the right to access abortion.
Tell me about the push that's currently underway to pass a bill that would ban the sale of cell data. And actually, before you tell me about it, I want to roll just a little bit of a video that the ACLU of Massachusetts produced making the case for this legislation. Let's take a look.
Every day, companies collect and sell personal location data from your cell phone, revealing where you live, work, play, and more. Anyone can buy location data. Anti-abortion extremists, domestic abusers, foreign governments, employers.
Rebecca Hart-Holder, why is this legislation necessary? And have we seen here in Massachusetts people having their cell phone data sold to people who want to harass them because of abortions that they may have received or reproductive services they may have received?
Well, I think first we have to situate Massachusetts in the national landscape. So the goal of anti-abortion advocates is not to ban abortion in some states. It is to ban abortion in all states. So part of the attacks on patients seeking reproductive health care is to use third-party sellers to purchase location data. We know that this has already happened. Vice had a great piece that explained that there are abortion heat maps being made by anti-abortion protesters to track patients who travel to states like Massachusetts where access is codified. That is simply unacceptable. So we are working, as you said, with Planned Parenthood and with the ACLU to ban the sale of that data in Massachusetts so that people can come here without fear. We know that party actors are going to try to reach into Massachusetts. Our first step was the Provider Shield Law. Our second step is to try to protect patients and make sure that their most intimate location data, where they live, where they work, where they get health care, is not subject to, the whims of anti-abortion advocates in other states who want to criminalize them for getting that care.
Renee Landers, earlier this year, a Texas judge issued an order that would have stopped the distribution of mifepristone, which is a drug people use to get medical abortions. That was then stayed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Right after the Texas judge issued that ruling, Governor Healy came out and said, we're going to stockpile mifepristone here in Massachusetts. Don't worry, if you need it, you're going to be able to get it. Are there any other legal fights brewing or legal decisions looming that could force people here in Massachusetts to spring into action to respond to something that happened somewhere else and is very big?
Well, I think that that's always the possibility. I think the mifepristone one is the most significant one right now. And, right now the case is back with the Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit to, examine what the district court judge did in that case. There's a competing decision in another circuit, which was, kept mifepristone on the market and upheld the FDA's approval of the drug. So I do think that, as Rebecca has said, that is going to be an ongoing battle. I think the next fight might be over the FDA's anticipated authorization of an over-the-counter contraceptive pill. And so, abortion is just only one part of the reproductive health care landscape. Very important to reproductive health is the ability to have effective contraception and to increase access to that. And I think that the same people who are opposed to abortion will be advocating to try to preclude that from the market as well.
You know, I had a sense that story was brewing, and yet I compartmentalized in my mind, even though what you say makes complete sense that they go together. I hadn't even thought of that as another thing that might have ripple effects coming up to watch. Rebecca, would you add anything to that list of decisions that may be looming that are about to come down?
Yeah, we're certainly watching a law in Idaho that would make it a crime to help people travel for abortion care. So you would think that the right to travel is constitutionally protected and that we should certainly not worry about anything that abridges that right. But I think abortion exceptionalism is alive and well in the federal court system. And so that is a case that we are paying real attention to. I think anything that anti-abortion advocates can do to really attack access in our states, we have our eye on, because like I said before, the goal is a 50-state ban. The goal is not a 19-state ban, which is what we have right now.
All right, I'm going to ask. Oh, go ahead, Renee.
No, I just wanted to say one other thing on that. The right to travel, I think, is at risk. Justice Kavanaugh and Dobbs wrote a decision saying, "Oh, this has nothing to do," a concurrence that says this has nothing to do with the right to travel. But the right to travel in the Constitution is based on a similar logic that the court used in the Roe and Casey cases that protected the right to abortion. So I do not think that we can rest easily that the right to travel is somehow going to be accepted from the new trend in the Supreme Court jurisprudence.
I'd like to ask you both, if we've got time, maybe a minute and a half left. Back when Roe was overturned, then Governor Baker suggested there could be an indirect benefit to Massachusetts, that maybe businesses would choose to relocate here because they liked the way this state handled reproductive rights. We've heard similar arguments made from current Governor Maura Healey, and yet we've also seen that a large number of people are continuing to leave Massachusetts, in some cases going to states like Florida that are pushing for very restrictive policies when it comes to abortion. And I'd love to know, now it's a minute left because I filibustered, I'd love to know what you each make of that. Rebecca, let's start with you, and then you get the last word, Renee.
Look, I think it's important that Massachusetts is a place that's safe for people to access abortion care and safe for people to access gender-affirming care. But those are people who have the freedom and the resources to move here. And there are a lot of people left who simply don't have that access to care. So we just simply cannot leave them behind. We have to make sure that we are getting them the medication they need to affirm their lives without issue.
All right, Renee, last word to you.
Well, so I would say the counterexample is the Disney fight that Disney is having with DeSantis, Governor DeSantis in Florida. And, they canceled a massive project in Florida because of the inhospitable climate there for the values that Disney wanted to continue to affirm in its business practices.
Right, so maybe an opportunity for Massachusetts if, for example, we can make it easier for more people to get homes here that they can afford. Right. Renee Landers, Rebecca Hart-Holder, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Next up, the Boston City Council doesn't always feature a lot of drama. At the end of the late Mayor Tom Menino's tenure, and again under his successor, Marty Walsh, the council did launch some high-profile political careers, including Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Attorney General Andrea Campbell, and current Mayor Michelle Wu. But sharp, sustained public conflict wasn't the norm. This iteration of the council is different. During the pandemic, it was the place where opponents of the city's COVID mandates made their displeasure known. It also got pulled into last year's acrimonious Suffolk D.A. race. And this year, its redistricting process highlighted and exacerbated tensions on the body and in the city. Through it all, my next guest has been trying to keep the council operating as one somewhat cohesive body, Boston City Council President Ed Flynn. Ed, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be with you.
What's it been like to be in your role at this particular moment in Boston's political history?
It's been a challenging couple of years for our body, but really for the city as well. It hasn't been easy. It hasn't been fun. But during difficult times, during challenging times, the residents still want positive and ethical leadership. And that's what I've tried to provide as city council president, as a district city councilor, working closely with Mayor Wu, working with my colleagues. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree. But what's important is we do our best and provide the best quality of life to residents across the city. We've had our challenges, we've had our struggles, and I think as of now, things are getting a little better. But we've had a difficult road that we traveled.
It's actually, you anticipated one of the questions I was going to ask you later on, whether you thought things were getting better in terms of the overall climate politically on the council and in the city, or getting worse. And it's heartening to hear that you think that they're getting marginally better.
They're getting better very slightly, and I say that in a positive way. It's because it's been challenging for the last 3 years and very difficult the last 3 or 4 years. The pandemic had an incredible impact on the body, but on the city, on the residents. We've never obviously had a pandemic before. It had a major impact on my constituents, especially in the Chinese community, in communities of color, on public health issues. But what the residents still want, even during difficult times, is us having the ability to work with each other, to treat each other with respect, and putting personalities aside, even though it can be difficult.
Once again, you've anticipated where I want to go, which I appreciate. You're good at that. You introduced a proposal recently that would implement an anti-bullying policy on the council. What exactly, if that were to become reality, and it hasn't yet, right? It's still tentative. What would be off limits if that did actually go on the books?
Well, I propose that. I think it's desperately needed. We should have had that policy 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's a new thing that we're proposing. I want to get it enacted by the end of the year. I wasn't able to do it during the budget process and during redistricting to have hearings, but I want my colleagues to come together, respect each other, and talk about what we can do to make this body a better body, but also a body that treats each other with respect and dignity, and our central staff, the public and staff as well. We have a lot of work to do, but having an anti-bullying policy will ensure that we know what the rules are, we know what the guidelines are, and it's important to follow them.
How would you draw the line between bullying on the one hand and sharp, pointed criticism on the other? Because I would assume that that could get tricky.
It is a difficult balance, and this is Boston politics. There's a lot of, as you know, Adam, there's a lot of sharp elbows in there.
I've learned over the years.
Yeah, right. But having said that, it's about treating people with respect. You can disagree with people. You can have differences of opinion, but it doesn't have to be so personal. It doesn't have to be so divisive. I think society is divided already, and we don't need to contribute to that. We need to bring the city together. We need to bring our colleagues together. And we want to show the city that we can do this. We want to encourage young people that are thinking about a career in politics as well, that maybe the Boston City Council might be a place for you, but we can't do that without showing the residents of Boston that we treat each other with respect as well.
I want to ask you about one moment that really jumped out to me, and I know it jumped out to a lot of people. Earlier this year, one of your colleagues, Councilor Frank Baker, who's about to leave the council, in an argument about redistricting, basically accused another one of your colleagues, Liz Braden, of importing the troubles into Boston city politics, the troubles being the conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Let's take a look at what Councilor Baker said at the time.
The clergy in Boston, they're all talking about this process right here. And they're viewing this exercise as an all-out assault on Catholic life in Boston. And it's not lost on them that the person that's leading the charge is a Protestant from Fermanagh. As the maps we are voting on today indicate, as the maps we are voting on today indicate.
We're in brief recess.
So that was actually in November of last year. Is that something that would have been prohibited if the anti-bullying policy were in place? And if so, what would the sanction be? I should mention, before you answer, Councilor Baker did go on to apologize after you recessed the body.
It could be considered bullying, and that type of incident, or any incident where a colleague feels bullied or disrespected in such a way, it would be brought before the council as a body, and we would discuss it. But the level of disrespect that our colleagues have shown each other over the last several years has gone up and continues to go up. Politicians are human as well, and they have families and difficulties and struggles, but there's no question that we need to change our behavior, and we need a set of principles, we need a set of rules that will guide us to make sure that when we go into the chamber or we do the people's business, 24 hours, 7 days a week, we treat each other with respect. And we're not doing that, and that's why I want to call for a anti-bullying policy that will impact the city council central staff, and councilor staff as well.
You've got another policy proposed right now, which is actually what made me first think, hey, we should get the council president to come on and talk to us. You want to make in-person participation at the council's meetings mandatory moving forward with a virtual option, tell me if I've got this right, for the public and also to accommodate people dealing with disabilities. Why do you want to get people back meeting in person as opposed to Zooming the way we have been for the last 3 years?
Yes, I propose that. I also want to see that take place at the BPDA in the zoning board as well. I think in-person meetings are more effective for the public. I think they give us an opportunity to meet the people that we're working with, talking to them before a meeting or after a meeting. You develop personal relationships. You understand each other better. I think on a little box on Zoom, it's difficult to make your argument or your point as effectively as you can in person. And the other reason, Adam, I think it's time for people to come back to work, especially in the downtown Boston area, in the financial district, downtown Crossing. Those areas are struggling. I want to see people in City Hall and then maybe going out for coffee with their colleagues or clients, or going for lunch or for a drink or dinner after work. But we need to support these small businesses, encourage people to come back to downtown Boston, spend your money. But the downtown economy has a major impact on the city's finances as well. So there's really two reasons I recommended that.
One of your colleagues, another one of your colleagues, Kendra Lara, the District 6 councilor, told the Herald a couple months back when you first floated this idea that it would make it more difficult for her to do her job, that it would pull her out of the district talking to the people she represents on a daily basis. What's your response to that response to your idea?
I respect her opinion. I respect her reasoning, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. There's a role for a district city councilor to play, and that role is primarily in the district. But there should be a certain amount of hours, a certain amount of meetings that they do come to City Hall, that they spend in City Hall. They talk to their colleagues. They talk to city department heads. That's an effective way to get your job done as a district councilor, knowing who the department heads are, knowing who the people are that clean the streets, who to contact if there's an issue. You can only learn that when you're in the building of City Hall. It's about one-on-one meetings, having coffee with people, developing personal relationships, and getting the job done that your constituents expect and deserve.
The council just sent a budget proposal back to Mayor Wu after you amended a proposal that she had presented to you a few weeks ago. Among other things, the proposal that was sent back to the mayor, which you did not support, would cut, I think, about $30 million from the Boston Police Department. If it were to become reality, and that's in comparison with the mayor's initial budget proposal, that $30 million cut, where would those cuts take place in the BPD if this version, again, is implemented?
They would take place in primarily the overtime budget. They would take place in other areas of the police department. But Adam, right now our Boston police officers are working 16-hour days a week, forced overtime, and they're doing that at least 3 or 4 days a week. So could you imagine working 16 hours a day, going home, getting a little bit of rest, and then coming back and doing another 16 hours. I think it's unhealthy. I think it causes problems for the police officer, for the city, for the police officer's family. I don't think you're on top of your game after 13 hours of working, especially in a stressful environment like a police officer. So those cuts will hurt. But what I'm proposing is consistently hiring 200 to 300 police officers every year for the next 10 years. We don't have enough police in the city. The city continues to grow, and we're not building that police force up. A lot of young police officers that are getting on the job are leaving to join the fire department. They're leaving to join other cities and towns, whether it's Braintree or Cambridge or Arlington, for many reasons. So we continue to lose police officers at a young age.
And you want to build up the ranks.
And we want to build up the ranks.
Okay, one more question for you before I let you go. I did a story at the start of this week on the Boston Hong Kong Dragon Boat Festival, which just took place last weekend. As you know, some critics of the event showed up and then afterwards continued to argue that the event shouldn't be tied to the Hong Kong government. It's supported by the Hong Kong government. Hong Kong's become more repressive as China has assumed control of it. There's now, I think, about 1,500 political prisoners in Hong Kong. The U.S. State Department says basic human rights are being eroded. You were at the festival. You praised it afterward as a celebration of AAPI culture in the greater Boston area. Does the criticism I just mentioned hit home with you at all? And might it make you, next year, rethink your participation in the festival?
Well, I mentioned, Adam, at the beginning, the impact the COVID pandemic had on the Asian community. And I represent the largest Asian community in Boston, in Chinatown, the South End, large Chinese community, obviously. Hate crimes went up in Boston during that period of time when President Trump pretty much blamed the Chinese people, or the Asian people, I should say, for bringing this virus to the United States. Even in the most progressive city like Boston, we've had a lot of hate crimes against AAPI, Asian community, against the LGBTQ community, communities of color. But my goal and my job as a district councilor has been to speak up consistently in support of the AAPI community. And I go to a lot of events to show my respect for the AAPI community. I think it's important, too, as a white elected official, to be present in the Asian community and let them know I stand up for them during good times and difficult times.
Well, I've always noticed you have, I believe, in Mandarin, your Twitter account it's bilingual, right? So what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that right now you plan to be there again next year.
That's correct.
All right, Boston City Council President Ed Flynn, thank you for coming in. Pleasure to talk with you.
It's good to be with you, Adam.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And as always, please tell us what you think. For now, thanks for watching, and good night.
How's retirement shaping